The house remembers what the living choose to forget. In the autumn of 2019, when the leaves turned the color of old blood and the wind carried whispers from the valley below, Marina Castellan returned to her grandmother's house in Ashford Hollow, a place she had sworn never to visit again. The piano still stood in the parlor, dust-covered and silent, its black lacquer surface reflecting nothing but shadows. No one had touched its keys in 37 years. The gravel driveway crunched beneath Marina's rental car tires like small bones breaking. She had forgotten that sound, or perhaps she had buried it, the way one buries all difficult memories, deep and deliberate. The October afternoon hung gray and still, the kind of stillness that precedes either rain or revelation. The house loomed before her, a three-story Victorian painted in peeling white, its gabled windows dark like closed eyes. Ivy climbed the eastern wall in deliberate patterns, as if following some architectural blueprint known only to plants and time. Marina sat in the car for a long moment after cutting the engine, her hands still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. She was 42 years old, a professor of musicology at a small college in Oregon, divorced, childless, practical. These were the facts she told herself when the past tried to surface. These were the walls she had built against memory. But walls eventually crumble. The letter from the estate lawyer had arrived 3 weeks ago, formal and efficient, informing her that her grandmother, Vera Castellan, had passed away at the age of 94. The funeral had already occurred. Marina had missed it deliberately, claiming a conference she had no intention of attending. Now there were papers to sign, belongings to sort, a house to sell or burn down, whichever seemed more merciful. Marina stepped out of the car. The air smelled of decay and earth, that particular October scent of things returning to soil. The wind moved through the bare branches of the oak trees lining the property, a sound like distant applause, or perhaps a warning. The front door's brass knocker was shaped like a hand. Marina had always hated it as a child, the way it seemed to reach for her, fingers slightly curved as if beckoning. She used her key instead, the same key she had carried for 37 years, though she couldn't have said why she kept it. Some anchors we carry not to remember where we've been, but to prove we escaped. The door swung inward with a groan that echoed through the empty foyer. Inside, the house exhaled the scent of old wood, lavender sachets, and something else. Something Marina couldn't name but recognized immediately, the way a body recognizes its own blood. The furniture remained exactly as she remembered. The grandfather clock in the hallway, forever stopped at 3:47. The oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors whose names no one remembered. The Persian runner, its pattern worn to threads in the center, where generations of feet had walked the same path. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust that glittered in the weak afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains. And then there it was. The parlor opened to her left, and within it, the piano. A Steinway grand, black as a coffin, positioned in the corner where it had always been. Its fallboard was closed. The bench sat empty before it. The needlepoint cushion faded to ghost colors. Around its legs, the carpet showed strange marks, not footprints, but indentations, as if something had circled it repeatedly, year after year, wearing patterns into the floor. Marina forced herself to breathe, in, out, the measured rhythm of someone who had learned to control panic, to compress it into something small and manageable. "It's just a piano," she said aloud. Her voice sounded foreign in the stillness, an intrusion. The house did not agree. She moved through the rooms with purpose, willing herself into efficiency. The kitchen needed updating. The appliances were from the 1970s, avocado green and harvest gold. The bedrooms upstairs smelled of mothballs and memory. Her grandmother's room remained untouched, the bed made with military precision, a rosary hanging from the bedpost. Marina didn't enter it. Instead, she found herself drawn to the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, Sarah's room. The door resisted when she tried to open it, swollen with humidity and time. Marina pushed harder, and it gave way suddenly, as if surrendering. The room beyond was a museum of childhood, a small bed with a patchwork quilt, stuffed animals arranged on shelves, drawings pinned to walls, a room preserved in amber, waiting for someone who would never return. Marina's younger sister, Sarah, dead at the age of 7, or so they said. Marina backed out of the room quickly, pulling the door shut. Some doors, once opened, let more than light in. Night fell like a curtain, sudden and complete. Marina had intended to stay in a hotel in town, but the nearest one was 40 minutes away, and the idea of driving those winding mountain roads in the dark suddenly seemed worse than staying in the house. She told herself it was practical. She told herself it was just one night. She made a bed in what had been the guest room, the only space in the house that held no particular memories, just the generic presence of transient occupants. The sheets smelled of cedar and something bitter. Dried flowers, perhaps. The mattress sagged in the middle like a mouth. Marina lay awake, listening. Old houses have their own language. The settling of boards. The expansion and contraction of pipes. The secret conversations of structure and foundation. She had forgotten this lexicon, or tried to. Now it came back to her with uncomfortable familiarity. The creak of the third stair, the rattle of the heating vent, the particular groan the walls made when wind pressed against them. At 11:47 p.m., she heard something else, a single note. Clear, pure, resonant. Middle C, if she had to guess, though the sound was distant, muffled by walls and years. Marina sat upright in bed, heart hammering. She waited. 1 minute. 2. Nothing. Old wood, she whispered to herself. The house settling. But wood didn't settle in perfect pitch. She lay back down, pulled the covers to her chin, closed her eyes, counted breaths the way her therapist had taught her decades ago. At 12:03 a.m., another note. Lower this time. F below, middle C. Marina threw off the covers and stood. The floorboards were cold beneath her feet. She had left her phone charging in the kitchen, a stupid oversight, leaving herself without a light. But she knew this house. Even in darkness, she knew it the way a body knows its own scars. She moved into the hallway, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance. The darkness was absolute, the kind of black that exists only in places far from city lights. She could have been walking through nothing, through the negative space between stars. At the top of the stairs, she paused. Below, the foyer stretched away into shadow. And beyond it, the parlor. Another note. E, then G. Not a melody, exactly. More like someone testing keys, reacquainting themselves with an instrument. Marina descended the stairs slowly, careful to avoid the third step that creaked. Why she was being quiet, she couldn't say. If there was an intruder, silence wouldn't help her. If there was something else, she pushed that thought away. The parlor doorway gaped open, a rectangle of slightly lesser darkness. Marina crossed the threshold. Her eyes had adjusted enough to make out shapes. The piano's hulking silhouette, the bench, the windows reflecting nothing. Everything was still. She approached the piano slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached it, she stood for a long moment, just listening to her own breathing, the thud of her heart, the small sounds of her body being alive. Then she reached out and touched the fallboard. It was warm. Marina jerked her hand back as if burned. Piano wood should be cool, especially in October, especially after years of disuse. But the surface radiated heat like a living thing, like something that had recently been touched. She lifted the fallboard, exposing the keys. They gleamed in the darkness, 88 teeth in a black smile. Ivory, real ivory, from when such things were still legal. Her grandmother had been proud of that, the authenticity, the expense. Now they looked like bones arranged in judgment. Marina pressed a single key, middle C. The sound that emerged was perfect, impossibly clear. No decay, no dust-choked mechanics, none of the damage that should have accumulated from decades of neglect. The note hung in the air, pure and accusing. "How?" Marina breathed. The house did not answer, but somewhere above her, somewhere in the depths of the second floor, a door closed softly. Marina didn't sleep again that night. She sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, drinking instant coffee and watching the windows for dawn. When gray light finally began to seep through the darkness, she felt a relief so profound it was almost painful. In daylight, the house seemed smaller, less menacing. Just a structure of wood and plaster, nothing more. Marina moved through it with renewed purpose, cataloging belongings, making lists, trying to impose order on the chaos of accumulated life. She avoided the parlor. At noon, she drove into Ashford Hollow proper, a town of perhaps 3,000 souls, built in a valley where 3 streams converged. She had loved it once, as a child, before everything changed. Now it felt like a stage set, preserved but empty, waiting for actors who had forgotten their lines. The diner where she ate lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the special of the day, had the same red vinyl booths, the same chipped formica counter. The waitress, a woman Marina's age with tired eyes and efficient hands, didn't recognize her. Why would she? 37 years was a lifetime. But as Marina paid her bill, the woman's gaze caught on her face, lingered. "You're Vera Castellan's granddaughter," she said. Not a question. Marina nodded. "Marina, I'm here to settle the estate. I heard she passed. I'm sorry." The waitress wiped down the counter, her movements automatic. That house has been empty a long time, even before she went to the care facility. "Did you know her well?" No one knew Vera well. She kept to herself, especially after... The woman trailed off, glanced away. "Well, after Sarah." Marina felt the words between them, unspoken but present, the way grief is always present in places where it has taken root. "Did anyone take care of the house while she was gone?" Marina asked. The waitress shook her head. "No one goes up there. People say..." She stopped herself, laughed awkwardly. "Small town talk. You know how it is." "What do they say?" The woman's expression shifted, became guarded. That it's best left alone. That some houses remember too much. She turned away, busying herself with coffee pots and sugar dispensers. "But that's just superstition. I'm sure you'll have no trouble selling it." Marina left a generous tip and drove back up the mountain as afternoon light began to fail. The house waited for her, patient as a spider. She spent the rest of the day in the upstairs bedrooms, sorting through her grandmother's clothes, her books, her small treasures. Vera had been a woman of simple tastes, plain dresses, sensible shoes, a few pieces of jewelry inherited from her own mother. Nothing revealed the woman she had been. The grandmother, Marina remembered, stern, silent, carrying something heavy and unnameable. In the back of Vera's closet, Marina found a box. It was made of cedar, about the size of a shoebox, with a small brass lock. The key was taped to the underside. Marina sat on the floor and opened it. Inside, letters. Dozens of them written in a child's careful handwriting, addressed but never sent, all to the same recipient. "Dear Sarah." Marina's hands trembled as she unfolded the first one, dated March 15, 1983, 1 month after Sarah's death. "Dear Sarah, I miss you so much. Grandma says you're with the angels now, but I don't understand why the angels needed you more than I did. I went to your room today. Everything is exactly the same, but you're not there. It doesn't make sense. How can a person just disappear? Love, Marina." She read another and another. Years of letters tracking her childhood, her adolescence, all the milestones and mundane moments she had wanted to share with the sister who was gone. The last one was dated June 1987, just before Marina left for college. "Dear Sarah, I'm leaving tomorrow. I don't think I'll ever come back. Grandma doesn't speak about you anymore, but I know she hears things. The piano at night, I hear it too. Maybe that's you. Maybe you've been here all along, trying to tell us something, but I'm afraid of what you might say. I'm sorry. I love you. Goodbye, Marina." Marina pressed her palms against her eyes, willing herself not to cry. Grief was a luxury she had abandoned long ago, packed away with other useless things. But holding these letters, evidence of her younger self, that child who still believed in angels and communication, something cracked inside her. She put the letters back in the box and carried it downstairs. The parlor door was open. Marina was certain she had closed it that morning, but now it stood wide, an invitation or a demand. Beyond it, the piano waited in the dying light. She walked in and sat on the bench. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, muscle memory from lessons long abandoned. She had been the musical one, the child with perfect pitch and natural talent. Sarah had been too young, only just beginning to learn her scales. When Marina pressed a chord, D minor, the sound was rich, full-bodied, impossible for an instrument that hadn't been tuned in decades. She played another, G major, then E minor. The music flowed out of her without thought, some half-remembered piece from childhood. Her fingers knew the patterns, the progressions, even as her mind struggled to name the melody. It was something simple, something she and Sarah had played together, a duet for 4 hands. Marina stopped abruptly, lifting her fingers from the keys. In the silence that followed, she heard it, the other part. The second voice of the duet played on the higher octaves, light and hesitant, the way a child would play. Marina's blood turned to ice. "Sarah?" she whispered. The playing stopped. The house held its breath. Then from somewhere above, from the direction of Sarah's room, came the sound of small footsteps running. Marina didn't remember climbing the stairs. One moment she was in the parlor, frozen on the piano bench, and the next she was on the second-floor landing, breathing hard, her pulse a drum in her ears. Sarah's door stood open. Inside, the room was exactly as Marina had left it that morning. Bed made, toys arranged, drawings on the walls. But something had changed. The air felt different, charged, the way the atmosphere shifts before a storm. Marina stepped inside. On the bed, one of the stuffed animals, a rabbit with one button eye, had been moved. It now sat propped against the pillow, facing the door, facing her. "This isn't real," Marina said aloud, her voice shaking. "This isn't happening." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth that all houses keep. Reality is negotiable. Memory bleeds into the present. The past doesn't stay buried. It lives in walls and floorboards, in the spaces between what was and what remains. Marina picked up the rabbit. It was surprisingly heavy, worn soft by decades of handling. Sarah's favorite. She had clutched it during her final days, when the fever had her and wouldn't let go. The fever that came so suddenly, that rose so high. That took her before anyone understood what was happening, or so they said. Marina turned to leave and saw it, a handprint on the window, small, pressed against the glass from the inside. The setting sun illuminated it perfectly, each line of the palm, each whirl of the fingers. A child's hand. She approached the window slowly, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't name. When she reached it, she placed her own hand over the print. It was smaller, Sarah's hand, but the shape was similar. Sisters. The same blood, the same bones. The glass was cold under her palm. Then it was warm. Then it was hot. Marina jerked back as the window began to fog, condensation blooming across its surface as if someone was breathing on it from the other side. But there was no other side, just a 2-story drop to the garden below. In the fog, letters appeared, traced by an invisible finger. Look. Marina's throat closed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The letters dripped down the glass like tears. "Look at what?" she managed to whisper. The fog cleared. The handprint remained. Marina backed out of the room, closing the door behind her. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to turn the knob. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, pressing her forehead to the plaster, trying to ground herself in something solid. "You're tired," she told herself. "Grief does strange things. Memory plays tricks. It's just the house, just old wood and isolation." But she didn't believe it. She went downstairs, retrieved her phone, and called the one person who might understand. Dr. Thomas Reinhardt had been her therapist for 15 years. The steady voice that had helped her navigate panic attacks, depression, the long shadow of childhood trauma. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Marina, is everything all right?" "I'm at my grandmother's house," she said, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. "In Pennsylvania, the one I told you about." A pause. "The one you swore you'd never return to." "Yes, that one." She moved to the kitchen, needing light, needing the ordinary sight of appliances and countertops. "I'm hearing things, seeing things. The piano plays by itself. There are messages. I know how this sounds, but..." "Marina," his voice was gentle but firm. "Have you been taking your medication?" She had stopped 3 months ago. The pills made her feel muted, distant from her own emotions. She had convinced herself she was better, that enough time had passed. "I'm fine," she lied. "This isn't about that. This is real. Something is happening here. Houses aren't haunted, Marina, but grief is. Especially old grief, unprocessed grief. You're in the place where your sister died, surrounded by reminders. Your mind is creating explanations for your distress." "Then explain the piano," she said, her voice rising. "Explain how it's perfectly tuned after 37 years. Explain the handprint on the window, the footsteps." "I can't," he said softly, "not over the phone. But I can tell you this. What you're experiencing is real to you, and that's what matters. The question isn't whether there's a ghost in that house. The question is, what does your psyche need you to confront?" After they hung up, Marina sat in the kitchen as darkness gathered outside the windows. Dr. Reinhardt was wrong. This wasn't about confrontation or closure or any of those clean psychological terms. This was about something that had lived in this house for 37 years. Something that had been waiting. At 8 p.m. and 8 p.m., she heard the piano again. This time it played a complete melody. Clair de Lune, Debussy. Sarah's favorite piece, the one she had been learning before she died. Marina recognized it immediately. Could see her sister's small hands stretching for the keys, tongue poking out in concentration. Marina walked to the parlor doorway but didn't enter. The piano played on, the music beautiful and terrible, each note perfectly placed, building toward the crescendo. "What do you want?" Marina called out. "Sarah, if that's you, what do you want from me?" The music stopped abruptly. In the silence, Marina heard a voice, thin, distant, like something carried on wind from very far away. "Remember." "Remember what?" Marina's voice cracked. "I remember everything. I remember you. I remember that day. I remember," but she stopped, because that wasn't true. She didn't remember. The day Sarah died was a blank space in her memory, a gap she had never been able to fill. She had been at school. Sarah had stayed home with the fever. By the time Marina returned, her sister was gone, the house filled with paramedics and her grandmother's wailing. Everything after that was fragments. The funeral, the casket so small it looked like a toy. The grave in the hillside cemetery. But the hours before, the why and how of Sarah's death. That was missing. "I don't know what you want me to remember," Marina whispered. The piano played one more note. High C, the sound of a question. Marina spent that night in the car, doors locked, engine running for heat. She told herself she was being practical, that the house was too cold, too old, that it made sense to wait for morning in the vehicle. But the truth was simpler. She was afraid. She dozed fitfully, snapping awake at every sound, every shift of shadow. Once she thought she saw a small figure standing at the upstairs window, looking down at her. But when she blinked, it was gone. Dawn came as a relief, pale and cold. Marina drove into town, ate breakfast at the diner, and called the only person who had been there that day. Father Michael Novak was 92 years old, retired from the church but still living in Ashford Hollow, in a small assisted living facility near the town square. He had presided over Sarah's funeral. He had been the one to give the eulogy, to speak of innocent souls and God's mysterious ways. When Marina called, he answered immediately. "Father Novak, this is Marina Castellan, Vera's granddaughter. I wonder if I could speak with you about my sister." There was a long pause. Then, "I've been expecting your call for 37 years. They met at the facility's common room, a space that smelled of coffee and old magazines. Father Novak sat in a wheelchair near the window, his hands knotted with arthritis, his eyes still sharp behind thick glasses. "You want to know what happened," he said, before Marina could speak. "What really happened?" Marina nodded, unable to find words. The old priest sighed. "I promised your grandmother I would never speak of it. She wanted to protect you, but Vera is gone now, and you're here, which means you're ready. Or the house has decided you need to be." "The house?" "Some places hold more than memories, child. They hold truths that refuse to die." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. This won't be easy to hear." Marina sat. "Your sister didn't die of fever," Father Novak said. "That was what they told you, what they told everyone. But the truth is darker. Sarah drowned." The word hit Marina like a physical blow. "That's impossible. There's no water, no pool, no pond, nothing." "Not outside," the priest said quietly. "But there is water in that house. There always has been, in the basement. A cistern, very old, built when the house was first constructed. Your great-great-grandfather used it to store rainwater. It's deep, very deep." Marina's mind reeled. She had never been in the basement, not once. The door had always been locked, forbidden. "Sarah fell in?" she managed to ask. Father Novak shook his head. "She was found in her bed, dry, peaceful, no marks on her. But when they examined her lungs," he paused, his expression pained. "They were full of water, cold, clear water that didn't match anything from the town supply. Old water." "That doesn't make sense." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But I saw the report. I spoke to the doctor who performed the autopsy. Vera asked me to pray over the house, to bless it. When I went down to that basement, when I saw that cistern..." He trailed off, his hands trembling. "What did you see?" "Ripples, as if something had just surfaced. But the water was still. No one had been down there in years." He leaned forward. "Marina, your grandmother believed that house had a hunger, that it took Sarah to feed something old, something that had been living in that water since the house was built. She blamed herself for bringing you girls there, for not understanding the danger." "This is insane," Marina said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? You've heard the piano. You felt the presence. The house is showing you something, leading you somewhere. The question is, are you brave enough to follow?" Marina left the facility in a daze. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was impossible, a delusion shared between a grieving grandmother and an old priest. But another part, the part that had heard her name whispered in empty rooms, that had felt the piano's unnatural warmth, knew it was true. She drove back to the house as afternoon shadows lengthened. The basement door was in the kitchen, half hidden behind a tall cabinet. Marina had to drag the cabinet aside to reach it. The door was made of heavy oak, with iron hinges that had rusted to the color of dried blood. There was no lock, just a simple latch. Marina's hand hovered over it. "Remember," the voice had said. And now she understood. The memories weren't gone. They were down there, in the dark, in the water, waiting to surface. She opened the door. Stone steps descended into absolute blackness. The air that rose from below was cold and damp, carrying the scent of minerals and decay. Marina used her phone's flashlight to illuminate the way, but the beam seemed weak, swallowed by the darkness. She descended slowly, counting steps. 10, 15, 20. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the earth far deeper than any normal basement should go. Finally, she reached the bottom. The cistern dominated the space, a circular pool perhaps 20 feet across, its surface black and still. The walls around it were made of old brick, sweating with moisture. In the flashlight's beam, Marina could see that the water was impossibly clear and impossibly deep. The light couldn't reach the bottom. Around the cistern's edge, someone had placed candles, dozens of them, melted down to stumps, forming a ring of wax and old prayers. And in the center of the water, barely visible beneath the surface, something floated. Marina approached the edge, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She knelt and angled the light down. At first, she thought it was her reflection, but the face looking back at her was younger, rounder, with eyes that held accusation and sorrow in equal measure. Sarah. Not a body, not a ghost, but something in between. A memory made manifest, a truth preserved in water. Marina's hand reached out, drawn by instinct or compulsion. Her fingers broke the surface. The water was freezing, and the moment she touched it, she remembered. Memory floods back like drowning in reverse. March 14, 1982. Morning. Marina was 10 years old, standing at the top of the basement stairs. She wasn't supposed to be there. The door was forbidden, had always been forbidden, but she had heard sounds from below. Splashing. Laughter. Sarah's laughter. "Sarah," she called down. "What are you doing?" "Come see." Her sister's voice echoed strangely, as if coming from the bottom of a well. "Marina, come see. There's a lady in the water." Marina descended the stairs carefully, curiously. The basement was dark except for a strange blue light emanating from the cistern. Sarah stood at the edge, still in her nightgown, her face flushed with fever and wonder. "Look," Sarah pointed. "She's so beautiful. She wants to show me something." Marina looked into the water. At first, she saw nothing. Then the surface rippled, and a face appeared beneath, pale, ancient, with eyes like deep holes and hair that moved with a current that had nothing to do with water. "Come away from there," Marina said, fear suddenly clutching her chest. "Sarah, come away, right now." But Sarah was leaning forward, reaching toward the water. "She says she's lonely. She says she's been waiting. She wants—" "No!" Marina grabbed her sister's arm, tried to pull her back, but Sarah was surprisingly strong, or the thing in the water was pulling her, or both. They struggled at the edge of the cistern. Sarah's eyes glazed and distant, Marina's heart pounding with terror. "Let go," Sarah cried. "I want to go with her. She says it's beautiful down there. She says there are pianos made of light, she says." Marina pulled harder, and Sarah's feet slipped. For one eternal second, her sister hung in the air, suspended between the world above and the water below. Their eyes met. Sarah's expression shifted from enchantment to fear, and in that moment, she was herself again, just a 6-7-year-old who didn't want to fall. "Marina," she whispered. Then she went in. The water didn't splash. It opened like a mouth, swallowed Sarah whole, and closed again, smooth as glass. Marina screamed, reached in after her, but her hands found nothing. The water was suddenly impossibly deep, colder than anything natural, and her sister was gone. Marina ran. Up the stairs, through the kitchen, calling for her grandmother. By the time they returned to the basement, the cistern was just a cistern, its surface undisturbed. Vera descended with a flashlight, looking, searching, but there was nothing to find. They called the police. Officers came, and paramedics, and men with diving equipment who went into the water and found only stone at the bottom. No body, no evidence of anything amiss. Then that evening, Sarah was found in her bed, dry, peaceful, dead, her lungs full of water that tasted of stone and time. Marina remembered being questioned, remembered the confusion on adult faces as they tried to make sense of it. She remembered telling them about the basement, about the lady in the water, about Sarah falling in. She remembered not being believed, and slowly, over days and weeks, she forgot. The memory sank into her mind like a body sinks into water, down and down until it disappeared from conscious sight. But the house remembered, the water remembered, and Sarah never left. The memory releases Marina like a drowning person surfacing. She knelt by the cistern, her hand still in the water, tears streaming down her face. Beneath the surface, Sarah's image wavered and shifted, sometimes looking 7 years old, sometimes looking the age she would have been. 44, older than Marina, if time worked the same way in the water. "I'm sorry," Marina sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I tried to save you. I tried to hold on." Sarah's mouth moved beneath the water, forming words Marina couldn't hear. But she understood their meaning, the way sisters understand each other across any distance. "It wasn't your fault. But I let go. I was scared and I let go. You were a child. I was sick. The water wanted one of us. It would have taken you if you'd held on." "The lady," Marina whispered. "What was she?" "Old, so old. She lives in all the dark waters under old houses. She feeds on loneliness and memory. But she can't leave the water. She can only call to us." "Why the piano? Why all these years?" "Because you forgot. And I needed you to remember. I needed someone to know I was here, that I didn't just vanish." The piano was the only voice I could find. Marina's heart broke open. 37 years of buried grief, of guilt, of questions without answers came pouring out. She cried until she had no more tears, until she was hollow and aching and clean. "What do I do?" she finally asked. "How do I help you?" "You already have," Sarah's image seemed to say. "You remembered. You came back. You saw me. But you're trapped." "No, I'm not. I chose to stay. Not in the water. I escaped that. But in the house, in the music, because I was waiting for you, for this moment, for you to know the truth." And now, the image in the water began to fade, like light at the end of day. "Now I can go. Now we both can." Marina felt it then, a shift in the air, a loosening, as if something that had been held tight for decades was finally releasing its grip. The candles around the cistern's edge, dead for years, suddenly flickered to life. And from upstairs, the piano began to play. Not Claire de Lune this time, something else, something new. A melody Marina had never heard, but somehow knew, as if Sarah had composed it in the long years of waiting. A song of forgiveness and farewell. Marina climbed the stairs, drawn by the music. The basement door closed softly behind her. The parlor glowed with impossible light. Not lamplight, not sunset, but something else. The luminescence of memory, of love, of things ending and beginning at once. The piano played on, its keys moving of their own accord. Marina stood in the doorway and watched, transfixed. She could almost see her sister there, sitting on the bench, small feet dangling above the pedals, hands stretched across the keys with that familiar concentration. The melody was heartbreaking and beautiful, full of longing and release. It built slowly, layering harmonies upon harmonies, until the whole house seemed to resonate with the sound. Marina walked to the piano and sat on the bench beside the emptiness where Sarah should have been. "Play with me," she said, and she did. Marina's hands found the lower register, providing the foundation, the steady bass notes that anchored the melody. The invisible hands, Sarah's hands, or the memory of them, or whatever remained of a sister who had learned to speak through music, danced across the higher keys. They played together, a duet 37 years in the making. Marina felt something shift inside her chest, a knot she hadn't known she was carrying loosening, dissolving. She played through her tears, not bothering to wipe them away, letting them fall onto the keys like rain. The music swelled, reaching a crescendo that seemed to shake the walls. And then, silence. Pure, complete silence. Marina's hands hovered over the keys. The air felt different, lighter, empty, but not in a lonely way. Clean, released. She looked up and saw it. Through the parlor window, a small figure walking away from the house. A girl in a white nightgown, her hair catching the last light of day. She walked down the driveway, toward the trees, toward the place where the road curved out of sight. At the edge of the property, she turned. Even from this distance, Marina recognized her. The same eyes, the same smile. Sarah raised one hand in farewell. Marina raised hers in return. Then Sarah turned and continued walking, fading into the gathering dusk until she was gone. Not disappeared, not vanished, but simply gone in the way that people go when they're finally ready, when all the necessary goodbyes have been spoken. Marina sat at the piano for a long time, her hands resting on the keys. The house breathed around her, settling into a peace it hadn't known in decades. Finally, she stood, closed the fallboard, covered the piano with the cloth that had been draped over a nearby chair. "Goodbye, Sarah," she whispered. The house didn't answer. It didn't need to. Marina spent that night in the house, her last night, though she didn't know it yet. She slept soundly, dreamlessly in the guest room. When she woke, morning light streamed through the windows, warm and gold. The air smelled of coffee, though she hadn't made any. She packed her few belongings and walked through the rooms one final time. In Sarah's room, the toys sat arranged as they always had, but now they seemed like museum pieces, relics of a life fully lived rather than a life interrupted. The handprint on the window was gone. In the kitchen, Marina found a fresh pot of coffee waiting, still warm. She smiled and poured herself a cup. Before she left, she returned to the basement. The door opened easily now, no longer resistant. She descended the stairs with her phone's flashlight, but she knew what she would find. The cistern was dry, not empty. The stone basin remained, the ancient brickwork intact. But the water was gone, evaporated or drained, or simply vanished, taking with it whatever old, hungry thing had lived there. The candles around the edge were just stubs of wax, cold and lifeless. Marina climbed back up and locked the basement door behind her. She left the house at noon, driving away down the gravel driveway. In her rearview mirror, the Victorian stood white and still against the October sky. Just a house now, nothing more. She would sell it, she decided. Someone else could live there, fill it with new memories, new life. The past had been honored, the dead had been mourned. Now it was time for the living to live. As she drove down the mountain road, Marina turned on the radio. Static crackled through the speakers, and then, faintly, impossibly, she heard it. Piano music. Clair de Lune played perfectly, with all the joy and concentration a 7-year-old could muster. Marina smiled through her tears and kept driving. Years later, Marina would return to musicology, but with a new focus, the power of music to carry memory, to speak across the divide between the living and the dead. She would write papers and books that other academics found strange but compelling, full of ideas about sound as a preservation of presence. She never married, never had children, but she taught piano to children in her Oregon neighborhood, and in each small hand, learning to stretch across the keys, she saw her sister. Sometimes, late at night, she would play Clair de Lune on her own piano, a modest upright, nothing like the grand Steinway that had been sold with the house. And sometimes, just sometimes, she would hear a second part begin, high and bright, the melody of a child who had learned to play it perfectly in the space between memory and forgetting. She never felt alone. The house in Ashford Hollow was purchased by a family from Pittsburgh, a couple with 3 young daughters who filled its rooms with laughter and light. They found the piano still playable, remarkably so, and the oldest daughter began taking lessons. She was gifted, the teacher said, almost preternaturally talented, as if someone was guiding her hands. The basement door remained locked. The new owners never went down there, never found the dry cistern with its ring of melted candles. Some doors are better left closed, even after the thing behind them has gone. But on October evenings, when the wind carries a certain chill and the light falls just so, the piano sometimes plays by itself. Not haunted, not trapped, but simply remembering. The notes drift through the house like a lullaby, or a warning or a blessing that sounds like forgiveness. And in the walls, in the beams, in the foundation stones, the house keeps its silence. Because what happened there is finished, the debt is paid. The sisters have said goodbye. But silence, like water, remembers everything. And sometimes, if you listen very carefully to the quiet spaces between your own breaths, you can hear it. The echo of a song that refuses to end, played by hands that learn to speak in the only language the dead can manage. The language of music, of memory, of a love that survives even drowning.